The rain came in sideways that October morning, the kind that made Manhattan feel like a city that had given up pretending to be beautiful. Evelyn Carter stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of her penthouse office on the 53rd floor and watched the street below dissolve into blur. 40 stories down, yellow cabs moved in slow amber lines. Umbrellas opened and collapsed like flowers in a time-lapse. People hurried. People always hurried down there. She did not hurry. She hadn't hurried in years. The office was spare in the way that only very expensive things can be spare. A single orchid on the desk, a Noguchi lamp throwing warm light across pale marble, a chair that had been designed by someone whose name alone cost money. Everything in the room had been chosen by someone else, arranged by someone else, maintained by someone else. Evelyn had approved it. That was the extent of her involvement. She was 36 years old and had run Carter Holdings for 4 years, since her father's health had made the formal transition necessary rather than gradual. She had not struggled with the transition in the way that some successors struggle. There had been no identity crisis, no imposter phenomenon, no period of adjustment. She had simply stepped into the work as though the work had always been waiting for the specific shape of her, which in certain respects it had. She was good at it, exceptionally good. She had doubled 2 divisions, divested 3 that were bleeding quietly without anyone admitting it, and repositioned the company's development arm toward a model that was more defensible in an era when community opposition could derail a project 3 years into construction. The Harmon Street development had been, until recently, the cleanest illustration of that repositioning. She had not anticipated what was wrong with it. This bothered her more than the opposition itself. Her assistant, Claire, knocked once and entered without waiting. Claire had learned not to wait. The Harmon Street report is on your desk. PR is asking about a statement before noon. Have them draft 3 versions, Evelyn said, without turning from the window. I'll choose 1. And the community liaison meeting at 4, move it to 5. I need the numbers before I walk into that room. Claire made a note. The contractor downstairs called again. There's a wiring issue in the east stairwell of the Harmon building. They want to send someone. Then send someone. Evelyn finally turned. Her face was composed in the way that faces are composed when they've been trained not to show anything. That's not a decision that requires me. Claire nodded and left. Evelyn turned back to the window. Below, a man in a gray work jacket was unloading equipment from a white van. He moved with the unhurried precision of someone who had learned to be efficient without being rushed, a different thing from what Evelyn did. Though she couldn't have named the difference yet. She watched him for exactly 4 seconds. Then her phone rang and she answered it, and the man with the gray jacket disappeared from her attention entirely. 3 miles south, in a building that shared nothing with Evelyn Carter's world except the same October sky, Daniel Brooks was already on his second cup of coffee at 6:40 in the morning. He stood at the kitchen counter of a 1-bedroom apartment in Bushwick, eating toast over the sink so he wouldn't wake Lily. The apartment was small, the way that apartments are small when someone has made real choices about what matters. The bookshelf took up an entire wall. Lily's drawings covered the refrigerator in overlapping layers, and the one good lamp in the living room had been positioned specifically so she could read in the corner armchair after dinner. The rest of the furniture was mismatched. The couch had come from a neighbor who was moving. The kitchen table had one leg that wobbled slightly and had been fixed 3 times with different solutions. Each one, a small archaeological record of Daniel's problem-solving. He was 40 years old and looked like it, not badly, but honestly. There were lines at the corners of his eyes from years of working outdoors. His hands were the hands of someone who used them constantly. Knuckles slightly rough. Nails clean. He kept them clean on principle. He had 3 jobs that week. The wiring contract at the Harmon Street building started at 8. The delivery shift started at 2. The boiler maintenance on Fulton didn't need him until Thursday, which meant Thursday would be long. He had the math in his head at all times, not dramatically, not as a source of despair, just as a fact of navigation. The way a sailor keeps track of currents. Dad, he turned. Lily stood in the doorway in her pajamas, the ones with the small yellow stars hair still compressed on one side from sleeping. She was 8 years old and had her mother's eyes and his stubbornness, which was a combination that had surprised him repeatedly in ways he was mostly grateful for. "You're up early," he said. "I heard the toaster." She climbed onto the kitchen stool and considered him with a seriousness that she brought to most things. "Is it the big job today? Harmon Street." "Yeah." "The one near the park?" "The one near the park." She nodded as though this confirmed something. "I finished the book last night. The one about bridges." He looked at her. "The whole thing?" "It had pictures." A pause. "Some parts I read twice." He poured her a small glass of orange juice and set it in front of her. She accepted it without looking up, already thinking about something else. He watched her for a moment, the downward angle of her face, the particular quality of her concentration, and something in him was very still. "Eat something before Mrs. Perez gets here," he said. "I know, Dad." He picked up his jacket. It was gray and worn at the left elbow, and he'd had it for 6 years. He'd considered replacing it twice, and decided against it both times for reasons he didn't examine closely. He left the apartment at 7:15, walked 3 blocks to the subway, and rode it north in the company of other people who were also going somewhere they needed to be. The Harmon Street building was a 12-story structure in a neighborhood that was mid-transition, some blocks polished and curated, others still rough at the edges, still belonging to the people who had been there for 30 years. The building itself was the center of a community development project that Carter Holdings had been publicly championing for the past 8 months. A project that had, in the past 3 weeks, become complicated. Daniel arrived at 7:50 and checked in with the site foreman, a heavy-set man named Roy who walked him through the issue without enthusiasm. East stairwell, floors 4 through 7. Junction box had been showing irregularities. Previous contractor had patched it badly. The patch had been visible to anyone who knew what to look for, which suggested the previous contractor had been working too quickly to care about what came after. Daniel had seen both careless and hurried work in his time. He didn't judge the distinction. He just understood that he was now the person responsible for what came next, and that was the job. "How long?" Roy asked. "Depends what I find. Probably half a day." Roy grunted and left him to it. The work was methodical. Daniel liked methodical work, liked the way a problem, once properly understood, could be addressed in sequence. He had been an engineer once, in another version of his life, and the instinct hadn't left him. It had just found a different scale to operate on. He was on the 5th floor at 11:40 when he heard the sound. It wasn't loud. A kind of sustained, small distress. The specific pitch of a child trying to stay calm and not quite managing it. He tracked it to the old service elevator at the end of the hall. The door was stuck between floors, the mechanism having caught mid-travel. He could see through the narrow gap. A girl, maybe 9 or 10, sitting with her knees pulled up. Backpack still on. She was breathing in a controlled way that suggested she'd decided to be brave and was working hard at it. "Hey," he said quietly. She looked at the gap. "Hi, I'm going to get the door open." "It'll take about 4 minutes." She nodded once. "Okay. What's your name?" "Sophie." "I'm Daniel." "You doing okay, Sophie?" A pause. "Kind of." "That's honest." He was already working the panel. "You like bridges?" Another pause. This one surprised. "What?" "My daughter loves bridges. She read a whole book about them last night." "How old is she?" 8. Panel open, assessing. "She especially likes the kind where the cables do the work." "What do you call those?" "Suspension bridges," Sophie said immediately. "That's the one." He found the manual release. "Okay. Ready?" "Yes." The door opened. Sophie stepped out and stood very straight in the way that children stand when they've been frightened and don't want it to show. Daniel crouched to her level. "You did great," he said. "Not everyone stays that calm." She considered this. "I counted to 10 a lot." "Smart." He walked her back to the lobby where her mother was already frantic and grateful in equal measure. And then he went back upstairs to the junction box because the work wasn't done, and Roy needed his half-day estimate honored. He didn't notice the woman in the tailored coat standing near the building's main entrance. Evelyn noticed him. She had come down herself, which she rarely did, because the PR situation had reached a point where she needed to see the building with her own eyes, rather than through the sanitized lens of her team's reports. She'd been standing in the lobby reviewing notes on her phone when she heard the commotion with the elevator. She watched the whole thing. The unhurried voice through the gap. The 4 minutes. The way he crouched down to the girl's level without making it a gesture. Without performing anything. When he walked back toward the stairs, she said nothing. She stood very still and watched him go. Her assistant called 2 minutes later with a question about the afternoon meeting. Evelyn answered it. And her voice was exactly as it always was, precise, measured, efficient. But she had already decided something. She didn't know yet what. He was called in 3 days later. The message had come through Roy, who had passed it along with a neutral expression that meant he thought Daniel should be cautious. Someone from Carter Holdings wants to meet. No further detail. The meeting room was on the 20th floor of the Carter Holdings building, not the penthouse, but still high enough to make a point. Floor-to-ceiling windows, the city tilted below. A long table that could seat 16, currently occupied by only 2 chairs facing each other at one end. Evelyn was already there when Daniel arrived. No assistant. No team. Just her, a glass of water, and a folder. She stood when he entered. He registered the fact and found it slightly unexpected. Mr. Brooks. She gestured to the opposite chair. He sat. For a moment, she studied him in the open, unself-conscious way of someone who has always had the authority to look at people directly. He met her eyes with the same directness, which she also noted. "You worked on the Harmon Street wiring job," she said. "Still do." "It's ongoing." "I know." She opened the folder. "I also know you have a degree in structural engineering from Cornell. That you worked at Meridian Partners for 6 years as a senior project engineer. That you left that position 4 years ago." She paused. "And that you're currently working 3 jobs." He was quiet for a moment. "You researched me. I research anyone I'm considering working with. We're not working together. Not yet." She turned one page. Carter Holdings is facing a significant communications challenge with the Harmon Street development. The project was designed to benefit the neighborhood, but the community has come to see it as displacement, Daniel said. She looked up. "That's what it looks like from the street," he said. "New buildings come in. Property values go up. Long-term residents can't afford to stay. Whether or not that's the intention, it's the pattern people recognize." A pause. She had not expected him to be this precise. "The board wants to demonstrate that the project has community support," she said. "We need a face. Someone credible. Someone the neighborhood trusts." She slid the folder toward him. On top of it was a check. 1 job, 6 weeks. "You represent the project in community meetings and public materials. Speak from your experience. $1 million. He looked at the check. He did not touch it. The room was quiet for a long moment. The city moved outside the window, indifferent. He picked up the check, held it by the corner, examined it the way you might examine something that tells you more about the person who made it than about itself, and set it down facing her. "No." She didn't move. "I haven't finished outlining the terms. You've outlined what matters." He stood. "You want me to perform. To put my face on something and tell people it's good for them. I don't do that. The compensation is. I know what the compensation is." His voice was even. Not angry. Certain. "My daughter is 8 years old. She watches what I do. I can't stand in front of her and explain that I helped people believe something I don't believe. And the number doesn't change that." Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. The expression on her face was not readable in the way that most faces are readable, but something behind it had shifted. "Thank you for your time," she said finally. "Sure." He buttoned his jacket. "You should talk to the actual residents, by the way. Not hire someone to speak for them. They'll tell you what they need if you ask without already having the answer." He left. The check sat on the table between them, though she was now alone. She looked at it for a long time. She told herself it was professional due diligence. She told herself that several times over the following week as she reviewed everything her team could gather about Daniel Brooks. The Cornell degree, the Meridian Partners work history, those she already had. What she didn't have was the gap. The thing that explained the distance between senior project engineer and wiring contractor. His former colleague at Meridian, a man named Gary Teller, who now ran his own firm, took her call on a Thursday. "Daniel Brooks," he said. "Yeah. One of the best we had." A pause. "What do you want to know?" "Why he left." A longer pause. "You'd have to ask him that." "I'm asking you." Gary Teller was quiet for a moment. "There was an accident. Residential building outside Philadelphia. Gas leak. Structural compromise, not a Meridian project. But Daniel knew the building. He'd flagged concerns about it before, through the right channels, and been told it wasn't his jurisdiction." Another pause. "When the leak happened, he went in. Got 4 families out. Saved 6 people. And he violated 3 separate protocols to do it. The firm had to let him go. Insurance liability, legal exposure, you understand how it works." He sounded like he didn't like how it worked. He didn't fight it. Just left. Evelyn set down her pen. "Was there a settlement?" "There was. He donated most of it. Kept enough to cover his daughter's first 2 years. Her mother had just passed. He needed to regroup." Teller paused again. "He's not broke because he's careless. He's broke because he made choices. There's a difference." She ended the call. She sat for a moment, in the silence of her office, the orchid, the Noguchi lamp, the pale marble, and felt something she didn't immediately recognize, because she felt it so rarely. She felt outpaced. She sat with this information for a long time. The office had grown dim around her. She hadn't noticed the hour, and the city outside the window had shifted from the gray of afternoon into the yellow-orange of early evening, the lights of it coming on one by one, like something being remembered. She thought about what it meant to go into a collapsing building for someone. She had made large decisions in her life, acquisitions worth hundreds of millions, restructurings that had affected thousands of employees, choices that had shaped the lives of people who didn't know her name. She had made those decisions from rooms like this one, with advisors and projections and legal review. She had never walked towards something that could kill her for someone else's sake. She picked up her phone and put it down again. There was no call to make. No efficiency to be extracted from this. She just sat with it, which was not something she typically did. Meanwhile, 3 miles south, Daniel was eating dinner with Lily. She had made the salad herself, which meant the tomatoes were cut with enthusiasm rather than precision. He hadn't corrected her. They ate at the wobbly table, the lamp casting its circle of yellow light. And Lily told him about something she'd read about Roman aqueducts. They built them without mortar in some parts, she said. Just the weight of the stones against each other. The shape held everything. "The arch," he said. "Yeah. The arch." She was thinking about it. Isn't that kind of funny? That things can hold each other up just by pressing together the right way? He looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "That's kind of funny." She went quiet for a moment, chewing. Then, "Dad." That lady called again. The one from the company. He looked up. "What lady?" "I don't know her name." She called the house phone. Said she'd try again. Lily tilted her head. "You turned down $1 million, right?" He was still for a moment. "Who told you that?" "You told me. You said, I turned down a job that paid a lot." She considered him. "That was $1 million?" "It was." She nodded slowly. Then, carefully. "Did you make the right choice?" He thought about it. Gave her the real answer, rather than the easy one. "Yeah. I did." "Okay." She went back to her salad. "Just wanted to make sure you thought about it." He had to work to keep from smiling. "I thought about it." The pressure on Evelyn's team was reaching a point where the options were narrowing. The community meetings had not gone well. 3 ward members had published an open letter, opposing the development in its current form. Two local churches had formally aligned with the opposition. The building permits were not yet at risk, but the legal team had started using words like preemptive and protective posture, which were words that suggested things were about to become expensive. She went back to Harmon Street herself on a Wednesday afternoon, without her team, without Claire. In a coat that was less conspicuous than her usual one. Not quite incognito, she didn't know how to be incognito, but quieter. Daniel was in the building. She knew because his van was out front. She found him on the 7th floor, finishing the final section of the wiring job. He was kneeling beside an open panel, not rushing, focused with the specific attention of someone who takes small things seriously. He heard her come in and turned. Something moved across his face, surprise, contained, and then settled back. "Miss Carter, Mr. Brooks." She stood a few feet away. "I want to try this differently." He waited. "I'm not going to make another offer," she said. "I want to tell you that I've been listening to the residents, to the ward members." She paused. "To what you said in that meeting room. What did I say? That I was asking people to believe something, that I should be asking what they need instead." He was quiet, watching her. "I can't undo the design of the project as it stands," she said. "But I can restructure the community benefit components. Add a housing preservation fund, guarantee income range units above the current minimum, create a local employment pipeline." She stopped. "But I need someone who knows the neighborhood and has credibility there to help shape the structure. Not represent it, shape it. That's different from what you offered before." "Yes, it is. And what do I get?" "Nothing. If that's what you decide." She met his eyes. The work would be real. The community would see real changes. You'd be part of building something that actually helps. A pause. "That's what I'm offering." He looked at her for a long moment. The building was quiet around them. The rain from the previous day had left everything slightly damp, the air carrying the particular smell of wet concrete and old wood. "I need to think about it," he said. "Take time. I'll let you know by Friday." She nodded, turned to go. He spoke before she reached the door. "Why did you come yourself?" She stopped, didn't turn immediately. "Because I needed to see if I was capable of asking a question I didn't already have an answer to," she said. She left. He remained crouched beside the panel for a moment, holding a screwdriver he wasn't using. He called on Thursday. Said yes. She was in a board meeting when he called. Had Claire interrupted. The terms he set were precise. No public-facing role, no marketing materials, no photos. His involvement was in the room, not in the campaign. He would attend community meetings as a resident because he lived 2 miles away, and his neighbors were affected, and he would advise on the structural benefit components because he knew how these things worked from both the engineering and community side. She agreed. He arrived at the first working session on a Monday morning in November, when the light came through the windows at a low angle and made the conference room feel momentarily warmer than it was. Her team was there: 3 people from the development division, a lawyer, and her communications director, a polished man named Foster, who had an opinion on everything and expressed it before being asked. Daniel sat down with a legal pad and a pen and said very little for the first 40 minutes, which made Foster visibly uncomfortable. Then he spoke. He took apart the Housing Preservation Fund proposal in 3 minutes, not to demolish it, but to identify the 2 components that would fail in implementation and the one that would work if restructured. He offered a specific alternative sourced from a program he'd seen operate in Cincinnati. He drew a diagram of the employment pipeline that corrected an assumption the development team had built in about who would actually qualify. Evelyn watched her team recalibrate in real time. Foster started to interject twice. Both times Evelyn stopped him with a look. After the session, when the others had filed out, Foster stayed behind. "He's not a housing specialist," Foster said. "No," Evelyn agreed. "So, on what basis?" "He's right," she said simply. Foster left. She gathered her notes. When she looked up, Daniel was at the door, jacket on, ready to leave. "Thursday at 2?" she said. "Thursday at 2. He nodded. "Foster's going to be a problem." Foster is always a problem. A beat. Something almost like humor in both of them. He left. She looked at the diagram he'd drawn on the legal pad. Clean lines, accurate proportions, labeled precisely. The handwriting of someone who had been trained to communicate spatially. She took a picture of it with her phone and sent it to the development team with a single note. This is the model. Rebuild around it. The sessions continued for 3 weeks. They disagreed regularly. The disagreements were productive in the specific way that productive disagreements are, each one clarifying something that had been assumed but not examined. He pushed back on the timeline. She pushed back on the budget ceiling for the preservation fund. He pointed out that the local employment pipeline was structured to benefit contractors rather than residents. She pointed out that a program structured the way he wanted would take 4 months longer to launch. 4 months is better than a program that doesn't work, he said. 4 months gives the opposition more time to build legal challenges, then address the opposition instead of racing past them. She looked at him across the conference table. You think it's that simple? I think the opposition has legitimate concerns, and you're trying to win a PR battle instead of addressing the concerns. His voice was still even, not heated. Those are different problems. She was quiet for a long moment. I've been running companies since I was 28, she said. This is how these things work. You move fast. You establish facts on the ground. You manage opposition through making it expensive for them to keep opposing you. Silence. Yeah, she said. That's how it works. That's how it works if winning matters more than getting it right. She looked at him. He looked back. Neither of them moved. The city sat outside the window, indifferent. She noticed, in these sessions, that he never drank the coffee her assistant provided. He always brought his own in a battered steel thermos that sat at his left elbow throughout every meeting. She had noticed it the first session and not mentioned it. She had noticed it every session since. There was something about the thermos, the specific, worn quality of it, the deliberateness of bringing it, that she found herself thinking about on the subway home one evening, and then felt slightly foolish about, and then thought about anyway. You're not afraid of me at all, she said. Should I be? A pause. Most people are. Most people need something from you. She looked away first. A slight adjustment barely visible, but real. And you don't. He picked up his legal pad. Thursday. He left. She sat with the remark for a long time after he was gone. It was Foster who told her, thinking he was providing useful context. Your contractor, he said. During a meeting she'd meant to be about something else. I pulled his full file. There's more to the Meridian story. I know the Meridian story. There's a detail your research missed. He set a printout on the desk. The building in Philadelphia, the one he went into. The gas leak. The 6 people he evacuated. He paused for effect. One of them was his wife's sister. He went in for her specifically and got 4 additional families out in the process. Evelyn looked at the printout. His wife was in the hospital at the time, Foster continued. Stage 3. She passed 4 months after the incident. He shrugged slightly. I just thought you should know what you're dealing with. She looked up. Something in her expression stopped Foster from saying the next thing he'd planned to say. Thank you, she said. Her voice was level. Close the door on your way out. He left. She read the printout twice. Set it face down. She thought about the man who had gone into a collapsing building for his wife's sister because his wife was in a hospital unable to go herself, and come out with 6 people, and lost his career, and donated most of what they gave him to make it go away, and then spent 4 years working 3 jobs to raise his daughter and keep her books on the shelf and her light on in the corner armchair. She thought about the check she'd slid across the conference table. She felt something that she identified, after a moment, as shame. That same week, Lily got sick. It started as a fever on a Tuesday, elevated by Wednesday, and by Thursday, the doctor at the urgent care clinic in their neighborhood was using words like respiratory infection and monitoring, and if it doesn't improve by Saturday. Daniel took Friday off from the delivery shift, which cost him a day's income he hadn't planned to lose. He sat in the apartment watching Lily sleep and doing the math in his head, the specific, navigational math of his life, and it did not work out. Saturday, it hadn't improved. Sunday, she was worse. The hospital on Sunday afternoon was not the good hospital. It was the close hospital, the affordable one, where the waiting room had plastic chairs and fluorescent light, and children sleeping in their mother's arms at 2 in the morning. He sat with Lily's head in his lap and kept his hand on her forehead and was very calm in the way that is not really calm, but is what you build when calm is what you need. He called in the wiring job as completed. He called Roy and explained without explaining. He did not call Evelyn. She found out through Claire, who found out through a source she didn't name. By Monday morning, Evelyn knew which hospital, which floor, which room. By Monday afternoon, she had made a call. She told herself it was appropriate, that it was a responsible thing to do for someone working on her project. She had resources, and he had a need. The transaction was simple. She paid the hospital bill. Anonymously, she thought. Though anonymously in these situations tends to mean less obviously attributed. She did not tell him. He found out on Wednesday. The nurse at the billing desk, meaning well, mentioned that the account had been settled by a benefactor in the particular tone of someone who thought the recipient should be grateful. When Daniel asked for details specific, direct questions that he waited for answers to the trail, led back clearly enough. He came to the Carter Holdings building that afternoon without calling ahead. He was shown up by the lobby security because he gave his name, and his name was in the system. He stood at the entrance to her office. Claire hadn't quite been fast enough to intercept, and Evelyn looked up from her desk and saw his face. She stood. "You paid my daughter's hospital bill," he said. She didn't deny it. "Yes." "Without telling me?" "Yes." "Why?" She opened her mouth, closed it. The prepared answer, the one about resources and efficiency, and it seemed like the right thing to do, was in her head, but she didn't use it. "Because I didn't know another way to help," she said. "You knew another way. You could have asked." The room was very still. "I could have asked," she said. "I didn't, because asking would have meant I could say no." His voice was even, controlled, but underneath it was something that had been trained rather than suppressed, and it pressed against the edges of his words. "And I would have said no. Because Lily is my daughter. Because how we handle hard things, she sees that. She's learning what to do when everything is difficult, and she's learning it from watching me." He stopped. "When you pay my bills without asking, you don't help me. You take that from me." Evelyn was looking at him. Something in her expression had shifted in a way that she wasn't trying to control. "I thought," she started. "I know what you thought." He wasn't harsh. He was just precise. "You thought the problem was money, and you had money. So you solved it. That's how you move through the world. I know that." He paused. "But I'm not a problem that needs solving." The room was quiet for a long moment. She said nothing. This was the first time, in any exchange between them, that she had nothing to say. No prepared answer, no strategic response, no version of the conversation she could steer toward. She stood and found that she had no mechanism for this situation. "I'm sorry," she said. 2 words. She said them slowly, as though learning them for the first time in this context, not the professional apology of a crisis statement, but the actual one. He looked at her for a moment. "Lily is doing better," he said. "I'm glad. I'll pay it back." "You don't." "I'll pay it back," he said again. Not angry, just clear. He left. She sat down at her desk and looked at the orchid, and the Noguchi lamp, and the pale marble, and felt the particular discomfort of someone who has just understood something they should have understood earlier. She did not call him for 2 weeks. She used the 2 weeks. Not to manage the situation, but to actually look at what she'd been building. She pulled every document related to the Harmon Street project and read them without the frame of "how do we move this forward?" She read them asking the question Daniel had asked in the conference room. Whose interests does this actually serve? The answer was uncomfortable. The project was not malicious. She had not designed it to displace anyone, but she had designed it to meet her targets first, and the community benefit components had been structured as a supplement, the minimum necessary to pass regulatory review and generate goodwill. It was a good project for her portfolio. It was not a good project for Harmon Street. She called Foster into her office and told him to clear his schedule. She called the development team and told them the same. She called the lawyers. She told them they were rebuilding the project from the community benefit components outward. The room went very quiet, in the particular way that rooms go quiet when people who expected one kind of meeting have just been told they're in a different kind. The timeline Foster began. Moves, she said. The Community Housing Preservation Fund becomes the structural core, not a supplement. The income range guarantees increase to 30%. The local employment pipeline restructures along the model that Brooks proposed. She looked around the room. We're going to do the consultation process over. Not a PR exercise. Actual meetings, with actual feedback actually incorporated. That will add 6 months minimum, the lawyer said. Probably 8, she agreed. The board, I'll handle the board. She closed the folder in front of her. We're not winning a PR battle. We're building something that actually works. A pause. That's what we do now. Foster looked like he had several things to say. He said none of them. She dismissed the room. When they'd filed out, she sat for a moment in the quiet office. Then she did something she had not done in the entirety of her tenure at Carter Holdings. She called the lead organizer of the community opposition, a woman named Ruth Holloway, who had been running the neighborhood advocacy group for 11 years, and asked if she could come to a meeting, not host one, come to one. Ruth Holloway was quiet for a moment. Come on Thursday, she said. 6 in the evening. At the church on Harmon. Thank you, Evelyn said. She went, without her team, without talking points. She sat in a folding chair in the basement of St. Michael's Church and listened for 90 minutes. It was the most useful 90 minutes she'd spent on the project. She found Daniel through Roy, who passed along a message. She'd like to talk if you're willing. He came on a Tuesday evening, when the Carter Holdings building was mostly empty, no conference room. She met him in the lobby with 2 coffees, and they sat at a small table near the windows. She told him what she'd done. The restructuring, the board meeting, Ruth Holloway, the church basement. She was specific and accurate, and did not ask for anything while she spoke. He listened. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Why are you telling me? He asked. Because I owe you an account. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. And because she stopped. I wanted you to know that I heard you. Not because it helps me. Just because it's true. He looked at her. The project is better now, he said. Yes, the people on Harmon Street will actually benefit. If we build what we're committing to, yes, that's what matters. Yes. She paused. I also came to say that I was wrong. Not about the project specifically, about how I move through things. She looked at the coffee cup. I'm used to treating every problem as something to be solved efficiently. And people are. She stopped again. People are not problems. He said nothing for a moment. No, he agreed finally. They're not. The lobby was quiet around them. The city outside the windows was deep in its November dark, the lights of it blurred by the cold. How's Lily? She asked. Better. Completely. Something shifted in his face, a slight warmth. She's very interested in the Brooklyn Bridge now. She made me walk across it with her on Saturday. In November, she had a good coat, a beat. Something passed between them that neither named. She picked up her coffee. I'd like you to continue advising, formally, paid, because that's the correct thing, at a rate that reflects what you actually contribute. She held his eyes, and I'm asking. You can say no. He held her gaze for a moment. What's the rate? He said. She told him. He was quiet. Then, that's fair. Yes, she said. It is. Spring arrived as it does in New York suddenly, after weeks of false starts, with a warmth that felt almost like an apology for the length of winter. The Harmon Street project had been formally relaunched in February with a new community benefit framework that Ruth Holloway's organization had co-signed. The local press had covered it. The coverage was careful rather than celebratory, which Evelyn had told Foster was exactly right. Careful means they believe it. Celebratory means they're waiting for the catch. The first families in the income range units had moved in by March. The employment pipeline had placed 43 neighborhood residents in construction and maintenance roles by April. The Housing Preservation Fund had prevented 2 displacement cases in its first 6 weeks. These were not large numbers. They were real ones. Daniel had been working as a formal project advisor for 4 months. He had an office he rarely used. He preferred the conference room or the Harmon Street building itself. He still drove his white van. He still ate lunch over the sink most mornings, though the breakfast situation had improved somewhat because Lily, on her own initiative, had started making eggs on Tuesday and Thursday. She had not commented on it. It had simply arrived and been noted, and that was the end of it. He had done it methodically, the same way he did everything. 4 equal payments over 4 months, each labeled in the memo line with the date and amount owed. She had watched the payments arrive with something she couldn't have named cleanly. It was not respect exactly, though there was respect in it. It was closer to witnessing. The specific feeling of watching someone conduct themselves exactly as they said they would. She had been surrounded her entire life by people who said what was convenient. It was disorienting, and then instructive, and then quietly transformative. To be around someone who did not. What had replaced it between them was harder to name. Not a friendship exactly, though they had become comfortable with each other's silences, which is in some ways closer than friendship. Not a romance yet, though the particular care with which they each chose their words when speaking to each other was the kind of care that doesn't come from professional respect alone. Something growing. Something that had started from the most unusual route, a check, pushed back across a table, and was now something else entirely. It was a Thursday afternoon in late April, when Evelyn called him to her office. He arrived to find her at the window. The city below was green now at its edges, the park visible from where she stood. On the desk was an envelope. "Sit down," she said. Then, as he sat, "I have something to give you. I'd like to explain it first." He waited. The project's first phase has been certified for the community benefit provisions. As part of that, Carter Holdings committed to a community investment fund separate from the preservation fund. Separate from employment. It's for education programs in the district. She turned from the window. The board asked me to decide how to structure it. Who manages it? How it gets distributed? A pause. "I'd like you to run it. Not administer it. Run it. As in, design the program, hire the people, determine who receives the funding." He looked at her steadily. "And I want to fund the initial endowment from this." She picked up the envelope and held it out. He took it, opened it. Inside was a check. He looked at the amount. He looked at it for a long time. It was the same amount as before. $1 million. He was quiet. "Last time I offered it," she said, "I was buying something. Your compliance. Your image." She held his gaze. "This time, I'm asking you to build something. The work is real. The kids are real. You decide how it runs." She paused. "And this time I'm asking, not offering." He looked at the check. He was very still. Outside, the city moved in its endless way, buses and people, and the yellow flash of cabs turning at corners. "Can I tell you something Lily said?" he asked. She waited. She asked me, back in October, after I turned down the first one, if I'd made the right choice. He set the check carefully on the desk in front of him. And I told her yes, because the money would have been for me. For relief. For getting out of something hard. He paused. "This is different. Yes. I want her to understand what this is. I'm going to tell her exactly what happened, why I said no the first time, and why this is different." He looked up. "She'll ask a lot of questions. She sounds like she usually does. She does. The faintest thing, not quite a smile, but the shape of one. Yeah. I'll take it." He picked the check up again and held it the way you hold something you mean to keep. She looked at him. And for a moment, the architecture of her face relaxed the precision and the control. The layers she'd built over years of operating at altitude, and underneath it was simply a person, someone who had learned, slowly and at some cost, that there was a difference between winning and getting it right. "Thank you," she said, meaning several things at once. "Thank you," he said, meaning the same. The fund launched in September of that year under the name Lily's Light, not because Daniel had suggested it, but because when Evelyn had asked him what he'd like to call it, his first answer had been, "I don't know yet." And then 3 days later, he'd called her and said it quietly. The two words landing in the phone call, like something long carried being set down. And she'd been quiet for a moment on her end of the line, and then said, "That's right." She had repeated it to herself after the call ended. Not as a professional confirmation, as something else. That's right. The first cohort was 15 kids from the Harmon Street district. Elementary school, mostly though two were middle schoolers whose teachers had submitted them because they were exactly the kind of students who fell through the cracks of every program that existed and who needed something designed for the specific shape of their particular need. Lily attended the launch event. She wore her good dress, the green one, and stood beside her father, and looked around at the 15 kids and the parents and the teachers with the measuring, serious expression she brought to most things. Evelyn found herself standing next to her near the back of the room. "Did your dad tell you about the check?" Evelyn asked. "Both checks," Lily said. "What did you think?" Lily considered this with real care. "I think the first one would have felt bad," she said. "Like something you have to carry." She thought for another moment. The second one felt like something that gets lighter when you hold it. Evelyn looked at her. "Your dad says you're interested in bridges," she said. "I'm interested in how things hold together," Lily said. Bridges are just one example. They stood side by side and watched the room, the parents talking quietly. The kids restless and excited. Daniel at the front shaking hands with the school principal and listening with his whole attention. Lily didn't reach for Evelyn's hand. She just moved incrementally closer, the way children do when they've decided something without announcing it. Lily didn't reach for Evelyn's hand. She just moved incrementally closer, the way children do when they've decided something without announcing it. Evelyn stood very still and did not move away, and felt something she had not felt in a long time, something she would not have known to call home if the word had not risen, unbidden, from somewhere below her usual altitude. She thought about the check on the conference table in October. The check that had been pushed back, the moment that had, without her understanding it at the time, started a slow chain of events that led here to a church basement in September, with 15 kids and their parents, and a man who had taught her, largely through refusal, what it meant to get something right. She thought about what Lily had said, something that gets lighter when you hold it. She had spent her entire adult life accumulating things that felt heavy. Not because they were bad things, they were not bad things, most of them, but she had been holding them the wrong way, with the part of herself that kept score and managed outcomes, rather than with the part that could be changed by something. She was being changed by something now. She was 41 years old, and she was standing in a church basement in Brooklyn, and she was being changed. She let it happen. Outside, the September light fell across the city at its warmest angle, the one that only comes in the last weeks before autumn turns. The arch held,